The wind howled through the towering skyscrapers as the city lights flickered like dying embers. Inside a dimly lit penthouse, a glass of whiskey stood untouched, its surface trembling. Then a piercing laugh echoed through the room, a laugh that shouldn't have been there, a laugh that belonged to a dead man. Detective Adrian Kane froze, his fingers tightened around the file in his hand. He had heard that laugh before, years ago, on the night a man fell from a high-rise window, his body shattered on the pavement below, but that man was dead, wasn't he? It was a stormy Thursday in the dimly lit office of the Lexington investigations. Clara absent-mindedly flipped through the pages of the Daily Observer, her fingers tapping against the desk. "Do you ever get the feeling," she mused, "that something is happening right under our noses, but we're just not seeing it?" Across from her, James leaned back, watching her with a smirk. "Clara, you think of 100 things at once. Be more specific." She tossed the newspaper onto the desk. The Daily Observer, something's odd about it. "Look here." She spread out 3 copies from different days. The title font, the spacing, the small imperfections, they change every day. James sat up, intrigued. "You're saying it's intentional?" She nodded. "A code, perhaps, meant for someone who knows where to look." James picked up a magnifying glass, his detective instinct sharpening. Hidden messages in plain sight. Now that's clever. Just then the office door creaked open. A man stepped in, his coat soaked, his hat pulled low. His voice was barely a whisper. "If you've noticed it, then you're already in danger." A gust of wind howled through the room as the door slammed shut behind him. The rain drummed steadily against the windows of the Blackthorn Investigations office. Eleanor Ellie Graves flipped through the damp pages of the Evening Gazette, her sharp eyes narrowing as she skimmed over the society pages. Across the desk, her partner, Daniel Rook, adjusted his tie with an air of boredom. "Tell me something, Ellie," Daniel drawled, stretching out his legs. "Why do you insist on reading that rag? Nothing but gossip and bad writing." Ellie smirked and held up the paper. "Because every so often, it prints something worth noticing, like this." She tapped an innocuous-looking advertisement at the bottom of the page. "Midnight Rook, the Black Queen moves. The White King is vulnerable. A single misstep, and checkmate." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like chess gibberish." "It's a code," Ellie corrected, tossing the paper onto his lap. "Midnight Rook, that's the name of that underground gambling den in Ravenscourt. The Black Queen moves. Someone dangerous is making their play. And the White King is vulnerable. That means a target, a high-profile one." Daniel sat up, his interest piqued. "And you think this isn't just some cryptic nonsense?" Ellie grinned, reaching for her coat. "Oh, it's nonsense, all right. But the kind that gets people killed if we don't pay attention." Moments later they were slipping into the shadows of Ravenscourt, their disguises impeccable. Ellie had traded her sharp detective suit for the slink of a gambler's silk dress, while Daniel, much to his dismay, found himself in the ill-fitting uniform of a waiter. "You owe me for this," he muttered, adjusting his starched collar. Ellie winked. "Be glad I didn't make you wear a clown costume." Inside, the club buzzed with murmured bets and the shuffle of playing cards. At exactly midnight, a figure emerged from the velvet curtains, his presence sending a ripple through the room. The Black Queen had moved, and the White King, he was already in danger. The game had begun. The masquerade ball at the Grand Royale Hotel was the talk of the town. Lavish costumes, glittering masks, and a feverish excitement filled the air as the city's elite mingled under golden chandeliers. But amidst the revelry, a darker game was being played, one of secrets, deception, and danger. Elara Blake, a sharp-witted journalist with a penchant for uncovering hidden truths, had received an anonymous tip, a cryptic message tucked inside a crimson envelope. Midnight, the Black Falcon, a stolen name, a vanishing act. It was enough to pique her curiosity, enough to lead her into the heart of the mystery. Disguised in a sleek black velvet gown and a Venetian mask, she entered the ballroom, her senses alert. Beside her, Ethan Vale, an ex-detective with a troubled past, adjusted his silver cufflinks, his piercing blue eyes scanning the crowd. "This is a bad idea," he murmured. "We have no clue what we're walking into." "That's the thrill of it," Elara whispered back, her lips curving into a knowing smile. Besides, we need the practice. As the clock neared midnight, a masked figure dressed as the Black Falcon stepped onto the grand balcony. A hush fell over the room. His voice was smooth, confident. Ladies and gentlemen, we all wear masks, but some of us hide more than just our faces. Then, with a flourish, he lifted his gloved hand, and in it dangled a golden locket. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elara's pulse quickened. The locket matched the one in the photo she had received earlier that evening. Before she could react, a sudden commotion erupted. The Black Falcon staggered back, clutching his side. A sharp metallic glint. Was that a knife? His mask slipped, revealing a shock of silver hair before he crumpled to the ground. "Get down," Ethan barked, grabbing Elara's arm as the lights flickered. In the chaos, a shadowy figure darted towards the side exit. The assassin? The thief? Elara didn't hesitate. She bolted after them, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Ethan was right behind her. The chase led them through dimly lit corridors, past bewildered guests and gilded mirrors, reflecting their urgency. The figure ahead was fast, but Elara was relentless. Just as she reached out to grab them, they vanished, gone, as if they had never been there. Breathless, Ethan ran a hand through his hair. No one disappears into thin air, Elara. She bent down, picking up a single playing card left on the floor. A queen of spades, a message, or a warning. Whatever this was, it was just the beginning. The dim glow of chandeliers cast flickering shadows across the lavish club, where laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft strains of a jazz band wove together in a mesmerizing dance of indulgence. The masquerade ball was in full swing. Gowns of rich silk twirled, masks concealed identities, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and perfume. But beneath the revelry, something felt off. Evelyn, draped in an elegant black swan costume, sipped her champagne, her gloved fingers tightening around the glass. A strange sensation prickled at the back of her neck. She had been enjoying the evening until a peculiar sound cut through the haze of conversation, a sharp, stifled gasp, like a breath caught in terror. It had come from the booth beside theirs, swallowed almost instantly by a burst of laughter. The timing was too unnatural, too precise. She turned to Daniel, her ever-skeptical companion, who looked dashing in his midnight blue masquerade suit. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. Daniel sighed, swirling his whiskey. "You're imagining things," but Evelyn wasn't. The unease that gripped her was too strong to ignore. She set down her glass with quiet determination and stood. "I have to check." "Eve, don't." Daniel reached for her arm, but she was already moving, her heart pounding. She pushed open the heavy velvet-draped doors of the booth next to theirs. A rush of cold air greeted her, a stark contrast to the warmth of the club. The dim candlelight barely illuminated the figure slumped in the corner, a woman in an exquisite ivory gown, adorned with delicate embroidery and lace, sat unnaturally still. Her Venetian mask, painted with intricate gold detailing, was tilted slightly, revealing a shock of auburn hair, and then Evelyn's gaze dropped lower. A dark crimson stain had spread across the bodice of her dress, like ink bleeding through paper. The color stood out violently against the pale fabric, and the flickering light caught something metallic, an ornate dagger, its jeweled hilt, glinting wickedly, protruded just below the woman's ribs. Evelyn's breath hitched. The entire scene looked almost surreal, as if the woman were a tragic painting rather than a dying soul. "She's alive," Evelyn gasped, dropping to her knees. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she reached for the woman, supporting her trembling form. "Daniel, get help, now." Daniel, momentarily frozen in horror, sprang into action, bolting out of the room. Evelyn, meanwhile, cradled the woman gently, feeling her labored, shallow breaths against her arm. The woman's eyes, wide, glassy, full of fear, locked onto Evelyn's face. There was terror in them, but also a desperate urgency, as if she were clinging to her last moments just to say something. Evelyn leaned in, barely breathing herself. "Can you speak? Tell me who did this." The woman's lips trembled, parting ever so slightly. A single strained whisper escaped. "Blackwood did it." and then silence. Her body shuddered once, her fingers twitched, and then all tension melted away. A final exhale, a stillness that felt deafening. Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat. No, not like this. The moment shattered as Daniel burst in, the club manager and a grim-faced doctor trailing behind him. The doctor knelt swiftly, his movements practiced and efficient. A few tense seconds passed as he checked for any sign of life, and then with a quiet shake of his head, he looked up. "She's gone." Evelyn slowly stood, the woman's final words ringing in her ear. Blackwood. Was it a person, a place, a warning? The club's extravagant glow suddenly felt suffocating. Somewhere in this room, among the masked guests and dazzling costumes, was a murderer who had just gotten away with it, and she intended to find out who. The grand ballroom was alive with music and laughter, a dazzling display of wealth and elegance. Gowns of deep crimson and shimmering gold twirled under the chandeliers, and masked figures whispered secrets behind delicate lace and velvet disguises. But beneath the intoxicating revelry, an unsettling presence lurked in the air, a shadow unseen yet undeniably felt. Eleanor Sinclair, sharp-eyed and ever observant, leaned against the marble railing of the mezzanine, her champagne glass poised at her lips. Something was wrong, she couldn't quite place it, but a deep unease had settled in her chest like a premonition. And then, it happened, a sudden muffled cry, quickly swallowed by the sound of a violin crescendo. Too quick, too deliberate. Eleanor straightened, her heart pounding as she scanned the ballroom below. Near the farthest booth, partially obscured by heavy velvet curtains, she caught a glimpse of movement, furtive, hurried. A figure in a silver mask slipped away into the crowd, their gloved hand brushing against the table's edge as they disappeared. Eleanor hesitated, only for a second before making her way down the grand staircase, her pulse matching the erratic beat of the music. She reached the secluded booth, her fingers parting the curtain, and immediately felt the breath leave her lungs. A woman sat motionless, her once radiant pearl-white gown, now marred by a deep crimson stain blooming across her torso. A jeweled dagger protruded just below her ribs, the hilt catching the candlelight in a deadly glint. Her mask and intricate Venetian design had slipped slightly, revealing lifeless eyes frozen in an expression of terror. The noise of the party seemed distant now, muted by the gravity of the scene before Eleanor. A sharp intake of breath escaped her lips as she knelt beside the woman, pressing two fingers against her wrist. Faint, barely there. The woman was still alive, just barely. "Help!" Eleanor's voice was sharp, urgent. Footsteps thundered behind her as James Whittaker, her longtime companion, and a man with an insatiable curiosity for mysteries, arrived on the scene. His face paled as he took in the gruesome sight. "She's alive, James," Eleanor hissed. "We need to." The woman's lips moved, barely a whisper escaping. Eleanor leaned in, straining to catch the words. "Blackwood did it." Her breath hitched, and then silence. The woman's body slumped, her final whisper hanging in the air like an unfinished melody. James straightened, his gaze dark. "Blackwood? Who the hell is Blackwood?" Before Eleanor could answer, the sound of hurried footsteps filled the corridor. The club manager arrived, pale and trembling, followed by a stern-faced doctor. He knelt beside the woman, fingers pressing against her neck. A long pause, a heavy sigh. "She's gone." A suffocating silence fell over them. Somewhere in the room, the killer was still present, hidden behind a mask like the rest of the guests, and Eleanor intended to find them, before they struck again. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, each note lingering in the heavy silence of the house. James and Eleanor Graves stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind them like the final punctuation of a night that had left them both shaken. The weight of the evening clung to them, unspoken fears, lingering dread, and an eerie sensation that they had stepped too close to something that should have remained undisturbed. Eleanor moved mechanically, unpinning her coat with cold fingers, her breath still uneven. Her mind reeled with the image, the one she couldn't erase no matter how hard she tried. The lifeless face, frozen in a grimace of fear, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as though she had tried to scream, but no sound had escaped. The woman had clutched something in her hand, a crumpled slip of paper, that had only one name scrawled upon it, Whitmore. James placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder, his touch grounding her. "You should rest," he murmured. "You won't find answers by replaying it in your mind all night." But sleep was elusive. Eleanor tossed and turned, haunted by whispers in the dark corners of her consciousness. The woman's voice, barely audible yet thick with urgency, echoed over and over again. "Tell Whitmore, he knows." She must have drifted off at some point, though her sleep was dreamless, just a void, as if her mind refused to process the horror she had witnessed. A sharp knock on the door jolted her awake. James was already up, fastening his cufflinks with hurried precision. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Inspector Holloway is here, and he's not alone." Eleanor forced herself out of bed, every movement heavy as if the night's events had seeped into her bones. She threw on a robe, splashed water on her face, and stepped into the sitting room, where the tension was thick enough to suffocate. Inspector Holloway sat stiffly in his chair, his face set in an unreadable mask. He had always been a serious man, but there was something different about him today, an air of quiet apprehension, as though he knew whatever came next would change everything. Beside him sat a tall, thin man with silver-streaked hair and sunken eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. There was something restless about him, something coiled tight beneath the surface. His fingers tapped absently against the armrest, betraying nerves he tried to conceal. Holloway gestured toward him. "Mrs. Graves, this is Mr. Ambrose Whitmore." Eleanor extended her hand. Whitmore hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking it. His grip was colder than she expected, and there was the faintest tremor in his fingers. Holloway cleared his throat, his voice clipped and businesslike. "Mrs. Graves, I need you to repeat exactly what the victim said before she died." Eleanor swallowed against the dryness in her throat. The words came out quieter than she intended. She said, "Tell Whitmore, he knows." A sharp intake of breath. Whitmore's fingers tightened around the armrest, his knuckles turning white, his lips parted slightly, but no words came. A long heavy silence stretched between them, then finally he spoke. "This is absurd." His voice was steady, but something in his eyes betrayed him. "I don't know anything. I don't even know who she was." Holloway didn't break eye contact, and yet her final words suggest otherwise. Whitmore's jaw tensed. "I think you're mistaken." The inspector held up a folder and flipped it open, revealing a photograph. He slid it across the table. "We've identified the victim. Her name was Lillian Whitmore." For a moment it seemed as though the air had been sucked from the room. A deathly silence followed. Whitmore paled. His entire body stiffened as he stared at the photograph. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." He looked up at the inspector, eyes wild with disbelief. "My sister died years ago." The room felt smaller. The walls seemed to inch closer. Inspector Holloway's voice was calm, but firm. "Are you certain?" Whitmore's lips parted slightly, but no words came. His eyes flickered between the photograph and the faces around him, as if searching for an explanation. Then realization dawned. A slow creeping horror spread across his features. His voice dropped to a whisper. Unless it wasn't her who perished that night." Eleanor felt her stomach twist. The truth, the real truth, was clawing its way to the surface, and whatever it was, it had been buried for far too long. The clock struck midnight, as Inspector Harrington stepped into the grand drawing room of Blackwood Manor, his sharp gaze scanning the room filled with uneasy guests. A storm raged outside, lightning flashing through the high windows, casting ghostly shadows against the walls. At the center of it all lay the lifeless body of Eleanor Fairfax, society's beloved heiress, her delicate fingers still clutching something in death's grip, a torn fragment of a newspaper. Across the room, Captain Roland Hale stood stiffly, his expression carefully composed, but there was tension in his stance. His costume, a rather peculiar affair made entirely of newspaper, was now the subject of scrutiny. The room bristled with whispers as Harrington addressed the gathering. "My men have orders to collect Captain Hale's costume. If the missing piece of that torn newspaper matches the one in Miss Fairfax's hand, then we have our answer." A slow, dreadful silence filled the air. Sir Arthur Danvers, Eleanor's longtime family friend, leaned back in his chair, a knowing smirk curling at the edges of his lips. "You won't find it," he said coolly. I know Hale. The night pressed on, and guests slowly departed, yet the mystery remained, hanging like an unfinished symphony in the cold corridors of the manor. Then, long after the lights had dimmed, and the house had settled into uneasy silence, the doorbell rang again. Inspector Harrington returned, his presence looming at the doorway, his coat drenched from the relentless rain. "I thought you might like to hear the latest developments," he said, his voice measured, but his eyes gleamed with something unreadable. Hale stiffened. "Go on." Harrington strode inside, shaking off his coat. "It's a clear case," he said, pulling out a folder. "The dagger belonged to Eleanor herself. The idea was to stage a suicide, but we found something else." He slid a photograph onto the table. "This," he continued, "is the last link in the chain." Hale's fingers twitched, but he remained silent. Across from him, Lady Beatrice gasped softly, leaning forward to inspect the image. The torn newspaper fragment, the markings, the faded ink, it matched perfectly with the tear from Hale's costume. A slow murmur spread across the room. Harrington leaned in, his voice smooth, deliberate. "A perfect case, wouldn't you say?" A flicker of something crossed Hale's face, an emotion buried deep, something unreadable yet profound. It was the look of a man trapped in a game he had no intention of playing. After the inspector left, the room fell into an eerie stillness. It was then that Evelyn Gray, Hale's closest confidant, turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why does he keep calling it a perfect case?" Hale exhaled sharply, smug satisfaction. "No," Evelyn pressed, "it's something else. Butchers know meat, fishermen know fish, and detectives know criminals. Harrington knows the real thing when he sees it, and he knows when something doesn't add up. He's pushing us, hoping we'll see what he's already begun to suspect." Hale's eyes darkened. "You think Eleanor actually took her own life, or someone made sure it looked that way?" Evelyn murmured. "And if they did, then the real killer is still among us." A gust of wind howled through the manor's ancient halls, rattling the chandeliers. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked. The game wasn't over yet, not even close. Captain Hale's disguise had been a clever makeshift affair, a gentleman dressed in newspaper, an oddity among the lavish costumes, but now that very disguise could seal his fate. "Do you know, Sir Arthur," Inspector Graves said, his voice sharp as a blade, "what we found clasped in the dead lady's hand? A torn fragment from a newspaper." He let the words sink in before continuing. "My men have orders to retrieve Captain Hale's costume from your house. If there's a tear in it that matches this missing piece, well, that will be the end of the case." Sir Arthur's expression didn't waver. "You won't find it," he said flatly. "I know Bingo Hale." With a curt nod, the inspector took his leave, but the weight of the accusation lingered in the air. That night, long after the commotion had settled, the bell rang again. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a glance as Inspector Graves strode into the room, an unusual glint in his eyes. "Thought Blunt's brilliant detectives would like the latest developments," he remarked, accepting the drink Tommy poured him. "It's a clear case," Graves said, swirling the liquid in his glass. "The dagger belonged to the victim. It was meant to look like suicide, but thanks to you two being on the spot, that plan fell apart. We've uncovered letters. She and Hale were entangled, carrying on behind Sir Arthur's back. And then the final link, the missing newspaper fragment. It was torn from the very outfit Hale wore that night. The match is undeniable, a perfect case." He reached into his coat, withdrawing 2 photographs. "I brought these along, thought they might interest you." Tommy studied them as Tuppence leaned in. One showed a torn scrap with the faint print of Daily Lee, the other the front page of the Daily Leader with a neat circular tear. They aligned seamlessly. "It's over," Graves declared. "We have him." Yet as Tommy walked the inspector out, Tuppence's eyes remained fixed on the photographs. When her husband returned, she murmured, "Tommy, why does Graves keep insisting it's a perfectly clear case? Smug satisfaction, I suppose." "No," she said slowly. "He's baiting us. He wants us to doubt it." Her fingers tapped against the photograph. "Detectives know criminals, just like butchers know meat, like greengrocers know vegetables, and Graves knows Hale isn't a killer, but all the evidence says he is." She exhaled sharply. "Tommy, What if it was suicide? But that newspaper scrap. Exactly. Let's look at the details again. She grabbed the photos, studying them anew. This isn't just any torn page. Look at these markings along the edge, stitching holes. She hesitated, then suddenly paled. Tommy, the dots. We've been looking at this all wrong. Find me all this week's daily leaders. He fetched the stack, watching as she shuffled through them with feverish urgency. Tuesday's paper had 2 dots in the lulled of leader, she muttered. But look, this fragment has a dot in the date of daily and another in the lulled. She looked up, breathless. This scrap isn't from Tuesday's edition. Tommy frowned. It could just be a printing variation. Could be, she admitted, but I don't believe in coincidences this perfect. There's only one explanation if I'm right. She straightened. Call Sir Arthur. Tell him I have urgent news. And get Graves back here. We're not done yet. Within the hour, a perplexed Sir Arthur arrived at their door, his curiosity piqued. Tuppence met him with a knowing smile. I must apologize for the sudden summons, she said. But I believe we've just uncovered the real mystery. Hale's alibi was shaky at best. He claimed someone had slipped a note into his hand. Don't try to speak to me tonight, Arthur suspects. Convenient. Too convenient. He couldn't even produce the note, and the whole story reeked of a carefully constructed lie. But Tommy and Tuppence knew the truth. They had seen him with Lady Merivale at the Ace of Spades. That much was undeniable. Tuppence's fingers traced over the 2 torn fragments of paper on the table. One bore the partial title Daily Lee, while the other, a front page of the Daily Leader, had a jagged tear along its top edge. A perfect fit. But something else caught her attention. Strange markings lined the edges. Stitches, she murmured. This was sewn together with something else. Tommy frowned. I thought it might be some sort of code. He shivered suddenly. It's eerie, Tuppence. To think we were joking about dots and hidden messages while something sinister was unfolding in the shadows. Tuppence didn't respond. Her face paled, her gaze unfocused. Then in a whisper, Dennis Rayburd. Tommy blinked. What? One simple, seemingly innocent clue, and it changes everything. Tuppence shot up from her seat. Find me all of this week's daily leaders, quickly. As Tommy scrambled to gather the papers, Tuppence's mind raced. The torn piece. Was it really from Tuesday's paper? She remembered something. Tuesday's daily leader had 2 dots in the L of leader, but this fragment, it had a dot in the D of DA, and another in L. Her hands trembled as she compared them. This wasn't from Tuesday's edition, she said, her voice tight with revelation. But that could just mean different editions. Tommy hesitated. No, it's deliberate. Someone swapped the evidence. This is no coincidence. Tuppence's jaw clenched. There's only one explanation, and if I'm right, we're dealing with something much bigger than a simple murder. She grabbed the telephone. Get Sir Arthur Merivale here, now, and call Marriott. He needs to hear this too. Sir Arthur arrived, visibly intrigued. Mrs. Beresford, this is quite urgent, I assume. Tuppence nodded. Sir Arthur, I need to ask, what was your costume at the masquerade? He blinked, caught off guard. A 17th century executioner. Why? Tuppence exhaled, a cold certainty settling over her, because that was the perfect disguise for a killer. Sir Arthur chuckled, but there was an edge to it. That's quite the accusation, Mrs. Beresford. Tuppence leaned in. A newspaper costume is easy to slip over another outfit. A simple note misleads Hale, keeping him away from Lady Merivale. She arrives, expecting someone familiar, but instead, she meets her executioner. A kiss, a Judas kiss, and then a dagger, quick and silent. She barely makes a sound, and then, the killer vanishes, but not before ensuring that a tiny torn fragment of his disguise is left behind. Evidence, false evidence. Sir Arthur's expression darkened. The real murderer was someone meticulous, someone who lived in the same house as Hale, someone who could access his costume and replicate the tear before destroying the original. Tuppence's voice sharpened. And that someone was you. A silence stretched between them. Then Sir Arthur slowly stood, smiling. You have a vivid imagination, Mrs. Beresford. Tuppence didn't smile back. Neither did Tommy. The trap had been set, and Sir Arthur had just walked into it. "You seem rather sure of yourself," she said, her voice steady but her eyes sharp with hidden meaning. "But my husband and I have uncovered something that I believe you ought to hear immediately. Please, do sit down." Sir Reginald hesitated for the briefest moment before lowering himself into the chair, his hands clasping the armrests a little too tightly. Tessa leaned forward, her tone casual, yet laced with quiet determination. "I understand you're deeply invested in proving your friend's innocence." A shadow flickered across Sir Reginald's face. "I was," he admitted, exhaling heavily, "but the evidence is overwhelming. Even I cannot deny it any longer." Tessa studied him for a beat before speaking. "And if I told you that I hold undeniable proof that clears him entirely," his eyes snapped to hers, "I would be overjoyed to hear it, Mrs. Sterling." Tessa's lips curled slightly. "Then let's imagine a scenario, shall we? Suppose I found a young woman who was dancing with Mr. Harrow at precisely midnight, the very moment he was allegedly at the Hollow Lantern." Sir Reginald's expression flickered with disbelief, then a glimmer of hope. "That's incredible. I knew there had to be a mistake. Perhaps Eliza truly did take her own life." Tessa's gaze darkened. "I wouldn't be so quick to assume," she said. "You're forgetting one crucial detail. The second man." His brow furrowed. "What second man?" "The one my husband and I saw leaving the balcony booth," she said, watching his reaction closely. "You see, Sir Reginald, there were two men dressed in identical costumes that night. By the way, what was your own disguise?" He hesitated, then forced a chuckle. "I went as a medieval executioner." Tessa's smile didn't waver. "How fitting," she murmured. Sir Reginald stiffened. "Fitting? What exactly are you implying?" "Only that the executioner's robe would be simple enough to conceal beneath a hastily donned second costume, perhaps something as nondescript as a newspaper-printed suit," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Now let's reconstruct the evening, shall we?" She leaned back, crossing her legs. "A certain note is slipped into Mr. Harrow's hand, instructing him to avoid speaking to a particular lady. Meanwhile, the lady herself remains completely unaware of this message. She arrives at the designated meeting place and sees exactly what she expects, her lover clad in familiar attire. They step into the private booth, and he pulls her into an embrace, a kiss, perhaps, a Judas's kiss, and as he holds her close, Tessa's voice dropped to a whisper. He strikes. Sir Reginald sat motionless. She barely has time to cry out before he stifles her final breath with a laugh we both know you're quite capable of faking. Tessa continued. But something goes wrong. She manages to tear a small fragment from his costume in her dying struggle. The killer, ever meticulous, cannot afford such a mistake. But what if he had easy access to an identical outfit? What if he and his scapegoat resided under the same roof? Silence stretched between them. All he would need to do, Tessa said softly, is replicate the tear on the innocent man's costume, burn his own, and step neatly into the role of the devastated friend. Quite the performance, wouldn't you say? Sir Reginald exhaled a slow breath, then let out a low, mirthless chuckle. "A fascinating theory," he mused. "The wild imagination of a woman who's read one too many detective novels." "Is that so?" came a new voice. Sir Reginald's head snapped up just as Ethan Sterling stepped into the room, placing a single card onto the table before him. Reginald picked it up, his face paling as he read the words aloud. "Sterling and Sterling, International Investigations." He inhaled sharply. "So that's what you really are. That's why Carter insisted I come here today. A trap." He stood abruptly, stepping toward the window. "A remarkable view," he noted, peering out. "One could see the whole city from here." "Inspector Langford," Ethan called. A door on the far side of the room creaked open, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped inside. Sir Reginald smirked. "I suspected as much, but I'm afraid, dear friends, you won't be taking me in today." And before anyone could react, he gripped the window ledge and launched himself out into the abyss. Tessa gasped, covering her ears as though to block out the inevitable sound of impact below. Inspector Langford swore under his breath. "Should have thought of the damn window," he muttered. "Not that it would have been an easy case to win in court," He'd covered his tracks too well. Ethan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. A tragic ending, he murmured. But then again, for a man like him, perhaps the only one. Tessa turned away, shaking her head. It wasn't guilt, she said softly. It was desperation. Ethan handed her a glass. Brandy. She took a sip, then smirked. No, something better, a victory toast. To a game well played, Ethan said. Tessa clinked her glass against his, and to a king who made the wrong move.